Hi there, History Channel. I am here with Bernie Sargent, a local historian, and he will be telling us about all the details of the Villa Stash House and what you can include in this great episode. Sir?
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, History Channel, for being a fine place to go visit and learn a lot about history. And we have a lot of history right here. In fact, we're sitting in what was called Pancho Villa's Stash House. The reason? Because Pancho Villa, when he was orchestrating the revolution in Mexico, used this as his unofficial headquarters in the United States. He would hide his money here. He would have his wife here, his family. Hipólito was here. His brother, who's 3 years younger than him, also helped him an awful lot with the revolution. So what did he do? They had a safe brought in. They put lots of money in it, $500,000 by all accounts, and a lot of jewelry. And there was so much activity in the streets at night, that they would oftentimes get complaints. The city would hear people saying there's too much activity there. There's too many people coming and going in that building. You really need to look into it. So they asked the customs official to check it out. And they did. They came here. They got the courts to allow them. They managed to get the safe open. And they took all of the jewelry out of there, but they did not take the money. The money could not be accounted for as to where it came from. So the $500,000 worth of cold cash stayed at the house. Now, we believe, the owner of the house, Enrique, believes, and I do too, that if you search the floors underneath this pavement, there's probably a number of areas where they have hidden or stashed more of the jewels, more money, because he needed that money to supply his army to keep the revolution going in Mexico. So what we'll do is we'll walk around here a little bit. I'll talk a little more about the building itself. It was built in the late 1800s, and initially it was an apartment. But then when Villa came in, it was all one, and it was actually owned by Hipólito's aunt's
Wife's aunt.
Hipólito's wife's aunt, yeah.
And her husband. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, George, who was a driver.
Benton.
Yeah, George Benton, who was a truck driver, he used to deliver food, he delivered meat. That was his job. And you got to believe he probably made a few shekels on the side here, working so closely with Hipólito and with Pancho. And to that end, this young man bought this property and the one next door, and he's cleaned it up, fixed it up, and he's going to make this a museum. We'll have a restaurant here. We're going to have all kinds of things taking place, but more importantly, you'll be able to see what this building looked like in the early 1900s when it was so busy with the Mexican Revolution.
Well,
So let's walk around a little bit and see what it looks like. Now, one of the things you'll notice, the homes in El Paso area in the Southwest, they were manufactured, they were built with adobe. The great thing about adobe is it retains heat in the winter and it keeps it cooler in the summertime. And these adobe walls have been protected using this material here, which it'll last a lifetime if you maintain it. And it was very, very popular. The churches, the missions, the houses were all used primarily with adobe or built with adobe. Now, going forward in 1881 when the railroad came in, then you started to see sticks and mortar buildings in the Southwest. But until that time, buildings like this were built. And this was not really I would say, an affluent area of El Paso at the time. So they maintained the adobe. It was inexpensive and very maintenance free.
And they used to hide coins, money in the adobes as well.
Yeah,
In the
that's
walls.
one of the things they used to do. They used to embed money and jewelry in the adobe. One reason they did that is because the Native Americans at that time had this propensity to help themselves to anything they could find. And you'll find if you cut an adobe brick in half, oftentimes you'll see things like chicken bones, stuff like that. And the reason is the natives would take rawhide strips and they would use it as a saw, and they could cut holes in the adobe so that they could get into the buildings or into the corrals and make off with either horses or jewelry or whatever they cared to take at the time. And you can see it looking at the walls and so on, and the windows, how thick it is. We didn't have air conditioning. So having these adobe walls certainly helped, and then not having to fire up a heater in the fall really was beneficial too, because once you warm the house up with adobe, it stayed warm all night long. And throughout this whole building, you will see pictures of Pancho Villa and his soldiers and the life that they led from roughly 1910 to 1920. And very colorful character. It was about 1915 when he saw that his cause was not taking hold in Mexico, and he decided to kind of back off from the revolution. But you'll see pictures throughout here that'll give you a great idea as to who he was working with, who he was not working with, and who he was friends with, and then ultimately not friends. Because one of the things that happened with Pancho is he made a lot of enemies along the way. You know, he did some things that people weren't very happy about. One is they had a gentleman by the name of Garibaldi. He was a mercenary. Garibaldi had made a comment that Pancho Villa did not win the war down south. And so Pancho Villa decided he was going to make amends, and he went to the old Sheldon Hotel, and he was going to, let's just say, eliminate Garibaldi. But the mayor of El Paso at the time went with him and convinced him, no, you don't want to do that in El Paso. That would be bad press. And that was kind of the beginning of the negative feelings about Pancho Villa in the United States. And it just got worse from there, ultimately ending up in the raid on Columbus and a few other things that Pancho did. He was not welcomed in El Paso after that period of time. So he would occasionally sneak in and out. He came in one time dressed as a priest, so people didn't know who he was, but most everybody knew Pancho Villa. And so he did that, and there's a cute story about Pancho Villa feeding his pigeons, and I was told by an elderly lady about 30 years ago that she used to, when she was a little girl, she used to admire this gentleman walking around downtown feeding the pigeons. And he always had one under his arm. She was told later that was Pancho Villa. Those were carrier pigeons that he was sending across the border, sending messages to his army. You also get to see people like Emiliano Zapata. Not really a friend of Pancho's. Pancho was, they were on the same side, but they had different ideas on how to fight the war. And so they didn't get along tremendously. They just sort of agreed to disagree. And again, another Zapata picture. Interesting story. Francisco Madero's family ended up with a winery in Parras, Mexico. And I had the opportunity to visit that winery. Now, keep in mind, Zapata did not get along with Pancho Villa. Madero didn't really get along with him either. But Zapata's great-grandson ran the winery. Now, one thing they did, and you'll see this when you visit the house, this is a characteristic of what would have been. They would have dug a hole, they would have buried coins and so on down there, and then covered it back up so that when the folks from the federal government came looking for it, they wouldn't find it anywhere. We believe that there may be more of these kinds of holes throughout this particular building, the stash house. So it'd be interesting to see if we can come in with ground penetrating radar, search this area, see if there's more of these kinds of caverns in the ground, so to speak, where they would hide that stuff. And right next door is where his generals would stay. So, and his officers, he would stay close to them. Now, we know that there was a tunnel that went from this house to this house for obvious reasons. And we're thinking, after seeing how it's sinking here, that it was a pretty busy, pretty good sized tunnel. And we'd like to really do more excavation to verify that tunnel goes between the two. We know pretty much that it does. And are there any more tunnels that go anywhere else? Because there's rumors that we had tunnels going across the river, which is only a few blocks from this house. Pancho's favorite snack was Snickers. No, I'm just kidding. No. And you can see the floor. You can see what the floor looks like in here. Again, this might be an area where we could go in with GPR and we could check it out and see if there's stashes down here. It'd be fun to find out, wouldn't it? You figure $500,000 back in the day is worth well over $16 million today. So what gold and treasures would we find where the officers slept? Now in the back, you can see it's in pretty rough shape, but this is where the corrals were. This is where the horses were kept. And up against that wall back there were the privies. The privies are a gold mine of information. Wherever you find a privy, you'll find lots of things, because they would oftentimes people would throw things in the privy just to hide them. Because who wants to go digging around in a privy? Well, there's probably not a problem right now with what was in there before, because we have found through excavations that there's a lot of jewelry and things like that that are hidden in the privies, dishware, flatware, things like that. So that's another area that we'd like to see GPR on, just to see what we can find. I think it's this whole block is rich with history, and we would like to share that with the world.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.